All right, guten Erev Yontiv, everybody. Let's talk a little bit about comparative religion. I'm prepared that this talk is going to upset everybody. I actually started recording it yesterday, and then my phone just conked out. I don't know. I'm getting a new battery for it, but it is what it is. Anyway, in the previous video, which I would consider that to be the first of this series of 2 videos, I discussed the apologetic argument of Judaism. Although there are many apologetic arguments in Judaism, I think the most powerful one is the national revelation argument, often known as the Kuzari argument, although the Rambam Maimonides says it before him, and really it's pretty much this simple meaning of Deuteronomy chapter 3. I mean Deuteronomy chapter 4, rather, verse 32. It's just a very simple reading of the text in Deuteronomy that indicates that this is what Moses is telling us already. Which is an amazing thing, that the apologetic argument is there in the text in a simple way. You don't need to make any kinds of sermons or homilies on it. It's just what the text means. And if anybody is really a student of apologetics in world religion, that is in itself unique. That you have something so clearly obvious in the text, making a very clear argument in support of the claims of the text. And there are actually a few others like that. Also like what we read tomorrow in Yisro, before the 10 Commandments, God tells Moses, and they will believe in you forever because of this. They're going to believe in you forever because of this event of national revelation. And that idea of believe in you means find you trustworthy, find this teaching trustworthy, find this apologetic argument trustworthy. Again, I don't think apologetics should be the core of why we follow a particular tradition, but it definitely helps. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. Because we have to recognize, and sometimes it's hard for people who live in a bubble to recognize that there are other people who don't agree with you. And it's very easily, as Orthodox Jews who sequester ourselves so much and cloister ourselves from the world so much, no matter how modern Orthodox we are, we generally tend to be a cloistered people among the Orthodox Jews, and we don't really see outside of our bubble. We don't have room to really appreciate very much outside of our bubble. And I think too often we negate and belittle anything outside of our bubble, and that's not only in the Haredi sector, that's something in what they call the ultra-Orthodox world, but it's something that exists in the modern Orthodox world as well. It's just kind of who we are. And the thing is that we're not unique in that. Although we kind of assume that we're not unique in that, which I think our assumptions sometimes go a little bit too far in assuming that we're not unique in that. Because just because we're not unique in that matter doesn't mean that everybody shares that same approach to life. But for the most part, a lot of people tend to find whatever they believe, and that's not only religion but politics and everything else. There are very few people who like to hear opposing views. I would say, the type of people who like to hear the opposing views are people who watch this channel because they want to hear something different. They want to hear something other than just reinforcing the things that they already know or believe. And I count myself among such people, meaning I enjoy hearing opposing views because I find myself that helps me embrace my worldviews in a stronger manner. Meaning, I don't find myself, although there is a challenge in that, but but in general, I'm not seeing myself, go run away and totally change my views. Although it's possible, we do see what our sages teach. Don't believe in yourself till the day you die. We saw there was the story of the high priest who became a Sadducee and poured the water of the water libation in the Feast of Tabernacles on his feet. It's a story we find in the Mishnah, and he was stoned to death. And he was a great man until that point where he unfortunately fell. And the same thing, Acher, Elisha ben Aviyah, there is a fear that should be on one's mind, that one should worry that they could fall into heresy. And yet, there's a balancing act there. And one thing is to pray to God for this. I know Reb Pinchas Koritzer, the holy tzaddik, who's one of the students of the Baal Shem Tov, one of the early Hasidic masters, from the illustrious Shapiro family, which was illustrious before him and illustrious after him. And Reb Pinchas Koritzer, he would teach his disciples to, obviously in addition to our regular liturgy and everything, recite this small formula of prayer: Rabbeinu Shalom necheni b'derech ha'emes, Master of the Universe, please graciously guide me in the path of truth. And we should be seeking the derech ha'emes, and we have to recognize that the derech ha'emes, the path of truth, is something that God has to grant us. It's not something we're necessarily going to receive. And I think that's also part of what we're discussing here. And so I'm totally and utterly convinced that Judaism is, as I don't mean every form of Judaism, and when I say that, I include every form of Orthodox Judaism, I do not mean. I'm saying the basic ideas of Torah I believe to be the one true religion. And in the sense where the Kotzker Rebbe said that 99% truth is 100% a lie, we have to accept that in a certain manner, that if it's not 100% truth, it's not the truth. However, that does not mean that we should not be tolerant of others. As great as the Kotzker was, he was probably not only a great Hasidic master, but this is not a probably. We know for sure he was a great Talmudist, he was a great scholar. And some historians, I'm saying like Rav Beryl Wein, not a Hasidic Yid, Rav Beryl Wein said that it's shaykh to say, it's possible to say that the Kotzker was the greatest Talmud Chacham of his generation, that he was the greatest scholar of his generation. And there are many, many, many great scholars in that generation. So I wouldn't venture to take sides in such an argument. Who's the greatest? That's not the type of thing we usually do. But the fact that Rav Beryl Wein said such a thing, it's impressive that he said that. And yet we see the way that the Kotzker lived, how he eventually became more or less a hermit, and he could not stand. He had no tolerance for all the falsehood in the world. He's not living in the way that is for the common person. I'm not saying that what he did was wrong. That was his job in the world. That was who he was. He fulfilled his mission that God sent him to the world for. But that path is not for everyone. And so yes, it's true what he says, that if it's not 100% true, it's false. But we still have to recognize what kind of a world we live in, and be able to live in the world without being so overwhelmed by striving for truth that we cannot exist in the world. It's not for us. And it was for the Kotzker. I'm not saying it wasn't for the Kotzker. I'm not saying it was wrong, for Shalom. But it wasn't for us. There are things we can learn from the Kotzker, of course, but that way of life is not for us. The life of a hermit. Although we can be little hermits in our own way. Hermits, I guess, right? Or was a little hermit a Kermit? I don't know. So anyway, the point that I'm bringing out here is that the world is not a world of 100% truth. We live, pragmatically speaking, in a pluralistic world. And for really all we can do when it comes to devotion is the best we can do is for ourselves. We can try to teach others, but it says in Pirkei Avos, Loi hakapdan malamed. If someone is too easily angered, they can't teach others. There has to be a path of tolerance for this broken world, and recognizing that this world is full of evil and falsehood, and yet to learn how to tolerate so we can bring that light, and to tolerate without tolerating, to tolerate in a pragmatic way but not tolerate in an idealistic way, but also to pick our battles, and also to recognize what's what in the world, and that sometimes there's a lot more good from something than there is evil, and sometimes some of the things that we embrace might be worse than they're good. I remember a phenomenal drasha or shir that Rav Moshe Weinberger once gave. Look at this man, that looks like a hermit there. With his dog and his beard and his fisherman's hat and his suspenders. Wish I could take a picture of that guy. He looks like he stepped right out of a hermitage. So he was talking, Rabbi Weinberger, Zolga's inside, he was talking about the different winds and how we're blown in different directions. And so there's a southern wind that leads us to seek wisdom, and a northern wind but what kind of wisdom, what kind of knowledge are we seeking? There's a northern wind that drives us to make money. And this is explained by things in the Talmud. I don't have time, but based on where things were in the temple. And then he said there's a western wind that drives us toward western values, and there's an eastern wind that drives us to be so dedicated to Eretz Yisrael, but we think that somehow, something being Israeli makes it kosher, which it doesn't. Of course, there are kosher things that are Israeli, but the point, like my friend Rabbi Asher Meza makes, which I don't think Rabbi Weinberger would agree with the maskona that he's saying, with the outcome that he's saying, but the idea is somewhat what's being expressed here. I remember Rabbi Asher Meza, he said, if he said he doesn't understand the modern Orthodox Jews who will listen to Israeli secular music and think they're doing something Jewish, listening to Israeli secular music, but if a Christian is singing the Psalms, well, that's Goyish. And he said that's the wrong type of. He said he'll listen to a Christian singing the Psalms. It's not mentioning Oisa Ish. It's not mentioning Jesus. What's wrong with a Christian song from the Psalms? I'm not that into music, to be honest. I'd rather listen to talk radio, to be honest. Listen to music here and there. I like Weird Al Yankovic. I like Gene Autry, and not much else as far as secular music goes. To be honest, a lot of the Christian music isn't really that good, but the Jewish music is usually worse. So that's just. But I'm not really that into music, to be honest. Obviously, when I say Jewish music, I mean popular Jewish music. Of course, I am very into holy, sacred music of Judaism. That's a different story. Anyway, the point that I want to bring here is it doesn't have to be all or nothing. We so often think that my way or the highway, all or nothing. And I hear Jews who believe this, I hear Christians who believe this, I hear Muslims who believe this. Meaning an acquaintance of mine, someone who volunteers sometimes in the prison where I work, and I brought him to volunteer. I invited him into the prison to minister to the Christian inmates. The guy, he's on the radio. He does these little commercials to try to get people to come to his church. And so I figure if this guy, he's spending time with the radio show like this, with radio broadcasts, he might be interested in coming and ministering to Christian inmates in the prison, and so I invited him. This guy, Drew is his name. He said on one of his radio commercials that if Jesus is who he claims he is, as is recorded in the books of the Christians called the New Testament, and it seems that there he claims that he's God, so then it's impossible for him to be accepted as anything less. He's either God or he's a liar. You cannot accept him as a good teacher or a prophet. He's either God or he's a liar. And if he's a liar, he's not a good teacher and he's not a prophet. The same thing, Muslims would say the same thing about Muhammad. If he's a liar, he's not a prophet. And if he's a prophet, he's not a liar. This is not how Judaism views the world. I'm saying our own prophets. Our own prophets were flawed men. Our own prophets had sin in their life. And yet they were prophets. we learn from the story of Jonah how God can use a flawed man. And we love Jonah. We feel with Jonah. We feel his pain. And as great as Moses was, greatest prophet, he wasn't allowed to enter the Holy Land. We know why. And King Solomon was the greatest of all the wise men, the wisest man who ever lived. And again, maybe the way the rabbis understand it, what the scripture says is a hyperbole, but again, he wasn't perfect. And that's okay. We still revere and venerate these men. We recognize them as men. We recognize them as flesh and blood human beings. Much greater than us, but still like us in some ways. And we can still put them up on a pedestal and recognize they're much better than we could ever be. But maybe not. Maybe we could be. Not that they're much better, but that not that we could ever be, I'm saying. Maybe we could be like them if we worked hard enough. But we'd have to work on it. But that's the point. This is what we have. So why am I saying this? What I'm saying here is that, of course, the prophecy of Moses is the most perfect prophecy in all of history. The way our sages explain it is that most of the prophets saw through foggy glass, a spaklaria she'ena me'ira, something somewhat translucent. And Moses saw through a spaklaria ha'me'ira, a clear glass window. But I would venture to say that some of these that we might label in our tradition as false prophets, Muhammad, Joseph Smith, Paul, whoever it is, still heard something through perhaps a totally opaque wall. But they heard something. It was muffled, wasn't perfect. And I don't mean that, meaning they heard the message they were supposed to hear. And they brought the message that they were supposed to bring to their people and to their cultures and to the cultures that they were brought to, which were not usually or generally their own cultures. Meaning that message that Paul brought to the people in Rome and Greece and so forth, that spread throughout Europe and then spread really throughout the Christian world, took them away from paganism to a certain extent, made the world a better place, even though we disagree. Don't have to say that it comes from the devil. You know, a Christian priest, Bishop Fulton Sheen, he would often say that there's a pie chart of truth, and he believes that his church has 100% of the pie, but he believes that other religions could have a significant piece of the pie as well, maybe even 99% or 90%, or even if it's 5%, there's something to get there. Meaning, he pointed out how in the Catholic Church they accepted the teachings of pagan philosophers as source material for them. Meaning the Church Fathers respected Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato. And he suggested that perhaps they could do the same with Confucius and Lao Tzu and the Buddha. And the truth is, Maimonides did the same thing. Maimonides accepted Aristotle very warmly. And so we don't have to be fooling ourselves to think that it's my way or the highway, and there's only one way. And I was listening to a lecture from Rabbi Bart Zadok, and he was teaching people how to make spiritual ascent. And he said that it doesn't matter if you're Jewish or not, you can use these practices. And he said, and if you're Jewish, expect to have a Jewish vision. And he said, if you're Christian, expect to have a Christian vision. If you're Muslim, expect to have a Muslim vision. If you're Native American, expect to have a Native American vision. And if you're Chavez, if you're some atheist, but you like Star Trek or Star Wars, you could have that vision. If you're Buddhist or Hindu, you're going to have those visions. Because we're talking about reaching archetypes. So the revelation at Sinai is the most perfect revelation, and we can tap into that tonight. We go into Shavuos. But we are going to be influenced by our cultures, by our upbringings, by where we came from, and that's okay. There's still, we don't have to say everything that's not ours is evil. There's such a thing as klipas noga. There's, meaning, also, we speak about demons in our tradition, which are more like the Muslims understand jinn than how the Christians understand demons as being the denizens of hell, the servants of Satan. Whereas we recognize they're just another race of beings that exist, and some are good and some are bad. And so when we could say, yeah, the gods that other cultures worship are demons, perhaps. Doesn't mean they're evil. It just means it's not something we're supposed to be worshiping. They're not really gods. It doesn't mean they're evil. Doesn't mean they're good. They just are. And so certain people happen to like these and have kinship with these beings. And we're not allowed to do that. Certainly not in a worshipful manner. That's not what we do as Jews. We don't need a middleman. We go wholesale right to the maker. But we recognize not everybody's there yet. The world's not perfect yet. We're in Galus. We're in exile. And eventually we'll get out of the exile, and the whole world will be full of the knowledge of the Lord, like the waters cover the sea. But until then, we got to do our thing. We know that what we have is the truth. But the truth is, what was revealed to our prophets. God told Malachi, from the rising of the sun to the setting thereof, great is my name among the nations, says Lord of hosts. Everywhere they're offering an offering to my name, a pure offering. Some of these other religions, all right, they're doing things by our standards, idolatrous, wrong. But God knows what's in people's hearts. If you're a good person, you treat other people with respect, you do what you're supposed to do. You don't steal, you don't murder, you don't hurt people. You don't do what these cops did in by the way, in a blue state. I wouldn't be surprised. They're probably Democrats, and killing a person because he had counterfeit money or something. It's ridiculous. That's not the way things are supposed to be. That's evil. The same thing. It's evil to go looting and victimizing other people because you're angry about that. You're angry. You write a letter. You go. You have peaceful protest. You don't loot and break windows. Got to find a balance, and that's what God really wants in the world. That we have to find balance. Yes, we pursue justice, but we have to pursue justice in a just manner. That's what it's all about. And so, does it matter how we worship this? Yeah, it matters to a certain extent, but now it's not the time or the place. That we're in Galus, we're in exile, we're in an imperfect state, we're in a fallen, sinful state. The Rebbeinu Shalom should help us. We should have a good yantiv, and have the restoration back to the way things are supposed to be, and then we'll be zeicha to be as Gal Tzedek and Meir Remain Omein, as Galus Kvitch Shemayim, and the Haramas Kerna Ter Yisrael. Should be zeicha the lichtige Kabbalah Satira Galtov.